work, we noticed that there were some skateboarders in the building next door that had a lot of like metal railings, so they would do, you know, their grinds and stuff over there. And so we made notes of all this and we wrote down things and rented speakers. We had about like 8 or 10 speakers and put them in various places in the graveyard. So in Scotland, I don't know if that is the way they do it here, but they tend to lie the gravestones flat like a bench. So we had, you know, places to put the speakers underneath and hide them. The idea is to not present the piece as something that demands people's attention. We didn't want to necessarily frame it as a cultural event. We wanted to infiltrate a place that normally was frequented by people and that these sounds could mix in the background almost transparently. So once we had all that set up and we had spent days, each of the sound designers on the team were responsible for designing a certain type of sounds for a certain length of time. So we had like about 9 hours of material that was split up between us for certain parts of the day. And one person would be responsible for maybe weather. So there would be rain or wind or, you know, that sort of thing, maybe birds, maybe more natural type things. Other people would be responsible for like human sounds or mechanical sounds or traffic, that kind of thing. And, you know, based on the analysis that we did, we noticed that at certain times of the day, traffic would change. So in the morning, there were more trucks. In the afternoon or around times for going and coming from work, there would be more bus sounds and taxi sounds and that sort of thing. So each of the sound designers got to kind of play, you know, the role of the city in one way. And it all seemed to work. We were removed to the idea is that the sound designers would be removed from view, so there's no kind of like, you know, cultural event happening. So we were removed inside the church, but we could still see the graveyard. And everything seemed to work. People kind of noticed the sounds, but they didn't really, you know, only the more sensitized people, I think the younger people who maybe are more media aware, were aware that sounds were being played back. But a lot of the people in the park just tended to, you know, mix them into the general sort of background sounds. And, you know, it was interesting to see some of the people's responses. The people who did catch on and were aware of the sounds, you know, would try to call it, you know, ask somebody like, what do you hear this sound? Or, you know, they would try to identify the sound, or they would try to figure out why the sound was happening in this place. Then the entire thing sort of fell apart when the news crew showed up, and they kind of blew our cover. So obviously they started interviewing people in the park and the sound designers and all that. So it became known what was happening. This was all part of a festival that was taking place in Aberdeen, and so there was a little bit of a framework in that the people who were going to the festival and had the program understood that something was taking place at the church. But since it was a public space, a lot of the people that were there weren't necessarily there for the festival, and they were just there because that's where they like to be at those times of the day. And I would have to say that the you know, both of the experiences, Budapest, we were shut down by the police, so that didn't work out too well. In Aberdeen, you know, it was more successful in that we were able to go through the entire day, and until the news crew showed up with their cameras and microphones, it seemed like, you know, the way that the sounds blended in and the way that people were around the sounds was very interesting and very telling. The whole idea of presenting field recordings in this way was a lot more satisfying to me and I think ultimately was aesthetically more interesting than doing it in a concert hall with all the expectations built into listening and consumption, exchange, and all those things that come into play when we pay for a concert. And again, because it was multi-speaker, it wasn't flattened necessarily. It was flattened still because you can't recreate this space even crudely in a multi-speaker setup, but the fact that it was a public space and the cultural baggage wasn't there, and that there was some attempt of using like point source for a sound, like a mono sound in a place in the location, it seemed to all kind of blend in a very interesting way. And it's very tricky to do this kind of thing. And I realize now that, you know, as I do them, the problems seem to become more apparent and something I can work out in the future. But the, you know, the field diffusion itself is a very interesting format and something I'm going to continue to do.